Hey, welcome everybody. So I am going to be taking part in a kind of a video challenge, not maybe not challenge, but a video. I don't know. I guess what do they call them? Hashtag or something by Justin Borges, and I'll try to put a link to his website called the Rule Books of Shame. So I have so many books. That what I've decided to do with mine is I'm going to break my presentations down by category. So today is going to be my first category, which is going to be my medieval rule books. And most of these are going to be skirmish level or warband level. So I'm not going to include the larger armies like Kings of War in this look, but those will be in another video. And hopefully the table won't bounce. I know I got some people indicating that the camera was bouncing. Well, what happens is when I lean on the table, as you can see there, it bounces a little, which is obviously reflected in the camera because it's sitting on the table. So what I'm going to try to do is stand up and go through these with you without them bouncing. So let's take some of these off, and we will start with the first one. So this is Outremer Faith and Blood by Osprey. I have not played this, but I have had a chance to look through it. And it was funny because Justin in his video indicated that he was going to use this to replace Saga. But I'm not exactly sure if you can replace Saga with this book, because this is a warband book, but from what I see, it has more to do with the individual fighters. So each of your fighters will have their own statistics. So you have a sergeant, a chaplain, and they each can have their own stats and upgrades, career path. So, and I really like the book from what I've seen. I just haven't gotten around to actually playing some games, which I do intend to do. But I would not replace Saga with this, because Saga is more of a warband. So Saga, you have categories of troops, and then you have a leader. But other than that, your band is either going to be in one of those categories or a leader. The actual men in the bands of troops do not get upgraded. So I will not be replacing this with Saga. The next one we have is Deus Vote, which I saw Justin had as well. And this is a war game based on the Crusades, put out by Fireforge. Again, I have not played this. I do like this book. It is very well done. It's very thorough. It's very specific. But if you notice, this is a unit-based war book. So you get bases and things more like your Warhammer than actually Saga or any of them. Now, having said that, I don't really consider this the same type of game as Kings of War, even though this is kind of a unit-based game. And the reason I would simply say that is I think I just think the rules are actually probably a little more in-depth than what you would normally get in what they call a flank and rank system. But I'm definitely going to be keeping Deus Vote. Hopefully I will be doing a thorough video of that, like I did with this game, War and Conquest. Now, War and Conquest is a unit-based game. So, I don't know, maybe I grabbed the wrong stat, because I thought this was my skirmish games. But both of these are unit-based games. Now, War and Conquest is actually for fighting, big battles with masses of troops and on the table. And I did a video of this, which I was really impressed with the mechanics in this game, and of course the layout in the book. So I definitely will be keeping that. You can look at my video review on this, which is actually one of my better viewed videos. But this is for ancient and the medieval world, so you can get a lot of use out of War and Conquest. Now, some of these are going to be the more obscure. So this one is called Knights and Knaves. And it says it is a skirmish level game of combat in the Middle Ages. Again, I have never played this. There appears to be some kind of counters in here with regards to moving your guys. It obviously looks like this is kind of a home game. I don't really know what I'm gonna do with this. I probably will keep it simply because I mean, I don't think there's any market for selling these types of things. People don't really look for these types unless they played them at a convention or somewhere. So, it says it's written by Phil Johnston and Les Benoit, which I don't know either one of those gentlemen. If you're watching, do not take that personal. Our paths have never crossed, or if they have, I don't remember or recall. I'm old. But anyway, so this is one I will probably keep simply because it's just easier to keep it than not. Now this is an interesting one called The Flower of Chivalry, published by a group called the Canadian War Games Group. And this is actually I would say it's a very good primer on the age of chivalry and medieval chivalry from a wargaming perspective. Now, when I first got this, I didn't even know that it had rules in it. And when I was going through it the other night, I did notice that there's a set of rules. I looked at them briefly, and it's probably not anything that I would play. But what I mainly keep this for, and I've been reluctant to get rid of it, is they have some excellent scenarios in here. So you have scenarios from the Scottish War of Independence. You have scenarios from the 100 Years' War. Excuse me. We have Agincourt, Formigny, the Battle of Formigny, which I don't recall that. That's interesting. Castilian. This is a solo scenario. So yeah, that's why I'm keeping this. Again, this is one of those publications. Why would you get rid of it? I mean, if you tried to sell it, you'd be lucky if someone gave you $5 for it, and it's just worth more than that to me. Now, this is a system called Revenge, which is miniature rules for the age of chivalry. And in addition to that, I have some supplements for this called the Normans. And this is a module. So I'm not exactly sure. I think that's maybe a little earlier period than this one, because this is Medieval Crusades. I have not played Revenge. Dave Alsop. For some reason, that name sounds familiar to me. And this is a system I think people are familiar with. Now I have not done this. I have not played this at all. It seems somewhat straightforward. I don't know. I will probably sell this just because, otherwise I'm not going to be getting rid of anything in this category. But so that is pretty much my my medieval kind of skirmish warband level collection, which is basically just rule books where you can play medieval battles in you can play medieval battles at the warband or small unit level. We didn't really look inside the one for the Normans, did we? So let's just see. It looks like this is mostly scenarios. Stamford Bridge, Hastings, Valles Dunes. So, and then it tells you to set up. Yeah, this is just basically scenarios. Kind of the units that were present. So forth. I like the scenario books. Sometimes you get some of the bigger books and they don't really put in scenarios, and they really don't list out historic scenarios if you want to replay any of those. But I don't know. Revenge, like I said, I would probably sell because it is a book that's a series that's somewhat well known. And as you can see, I've kind of got a decent stack of books in that category of gaming. So it looks like we're about 9 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get another stack and see if we can get through that one in this video. Okay, so I have gotten out my collection of mass battle rule books. And let's just start from the bottom here. Hopefully that will minimize the shaking. This is, as you all know, Warhammer Fantasy Battle. This is one of the, if not the earliest versions, one of the earliest versions. Let's see what the copyright on here is. Let's see Rick Priestley's name on there. So sorry about the shaking. So I don't know. I don't see the exact copyright on here, but obviously I'm not planning on getting rid of that. This says 1987. So probably not the earliest one, but I think probably the most iconic version of it. Next up is Kings of War. Now, Kings of War is a game I have played, but mostly I've only ever played it at conventions. And I do like the way it plays. The problem is I don't really like the factions. I mean, they just bore me. There's nothing interesting about them or their factions. I've said this in other videos, and I know recently they've worked a lot on their lore. And, you know, they've had Kings of War Vanguard, and they've worked on their miniatures. But I'm sorry, the game just never really sticks with me. So I will probably just be selling this. I mean, I kind of had it because, like I said, I like playing it at conventions. But, I mean, I will probably never invest in this. And even when I've bought in a few miniatures I bought in for this game, I never keep them. I just look at them after a while and get rid of them. Another game here, and this is Warhammer Fantasy Battles, another version. And for some reason, I thought this was... I want to say I thought this was the 6th edition. I mean, I don't really know the editions by heart. But there was one edition where they had done the troops in a way where you had to, like, take a leader, and then you could take a support unit and a core unit. And I thought this was that version, but when I was looking through it last night, I realized it isn't. This is just a basic rank and flank Warhammer Fantasy Battle. Probably the version I played or used most when I did try to play Warhammer Fantasy Battle. But I will probably be getting rid of that. I mean, it doesn't have any nostalgic value, and it's not the version I like best. Now, another classic, Fantasy Warlord Mass Combat Rules. Gary Chalk and Ian Bailey. If you know, Gary Chalk was from the Lone Wolf series, so I think he did most of the art in here, as you can tell. I mean, this is just getting kept. I don't need to explain it. I've tinkered around in my head with actually playing it, but when you look at it, you know, you kind of realize that the art of wargaming has kind of evolved a lot past here. But I will say this, it has about army lists. If you can get this companion, which added army lists for more monsters and mercenaries and goblins and all other kinds of things, it is actually probably the most game in a box system that you can get. I'm totally blanking out on what they call it, but sandbox is the word I'm looking for. It is probably the most sandbox mass battle game you can play, and the reason I say that is the armies in here are not tied to any world. So unlike Kings of War, where the armies are going to have powers based on what, you know, the authors or the creators think the Abyss should be able to do, or what they think the Basilians should be able to do, right? This Fantasy Warlord is not constrained by that. If you have elves, you can play your elves. If you have knights, you play knights, and that's it. There's no underlying world structure that is going to constrain your unit's abilities in the rules. And so I will always keep this because it is probably the most sandbox mass combat battle fantasy rule system out there. Now, another system here, Saga Iron Fist, Dwarf Wars by Frank Chadwick. And I've probably had this since it came out. And unfortunately, again, I've never played it. Never really ran into anybody else that was playing it. There was a line of miniatures that accompanied it that were fairly decent miniatures. I wound up getting a lot of them, like the dwarves, some of the elves, and the humans. But, I mean, it's a very interesting rulebook. Frank Chadwick has a lot of credibility in the gaming industry. You know, I did not read the specific fluff. You know, you kind of get most of the nations and nationalities you would expect. But I just probably never played it and would probably never would play it. This is by Westwind, by the way, which is the guys that did Vampire Wars Gothic Horror. So this was kind of their fantasy version. Instead of Vampire Wars, you got Dwarf Wars. And they had Frank Chadwick write it. I would like to read the fluff and kind of his take on the world before I get rid of it. Because I think it has more value for me just as good story than as a game. But my thinking is a lot of these I will probably bundle and just sell all together. And last but not least in this category is a little known, hard to find Dark Heaven Apocalypse, which was put out by Reaper. And this was actually, the world was designed by Ron Hawkins, who's the guy that's kind of the face of Reaper. Him and Ed Pugh now that are doing all the Kickstarters. So Ron is the one that does all the updates. I actually read, there was a companion story to this, which was actually very good. I don't know who wrote it, but I actually read it, and the world kind of takes all of the Reaper miniatures and kind of ties them into this world and creates armies and kingdoms around them. The Grand Kingdom of Anhur. Now, what happened was this was basically replaced by Warlord, which I actually have. But Warlord is actually a fantasy skirmish game. This was mass battle. So this is actually the only Reaper mass battle game that has been done. Right? And so you would have these units, and I think most of them had leaders. So like the Knights Templar, you would get a unit with a knight with a sword. This was the cost. I don't really say how many models were in here. So that's kind of interesting, because it was always my impression that these were mass battle rules. Because here it talks about human defensive army and his cost and so forth. Although I think a lot of the same stats were used in Warlord. So I'm actually probably not too sure of how they distinguished them, because like I said, it was my understanding that this was kind of the mass battle. But I mean, here it looks like they have an individual defender, magic users and so forth. So I will probably keep this. The Warlord one, they did 2 versions of that, and I don't know. I never really. I used to play it at conventions, Warlord, and it was fun. But again, it was one of those where I really never got into the whole world that was tied to the miniatures. All right, guys. So that is my stack of shame, rule books of shame, shelf of shame, whatever you want to call it, for today. Like I said, I will do another one where we will probably look at my fantasy skirmish games, which includes games like Warlord and Frostgrave and some other Osprey titles. Oh, stop shaking. Okay, take care. God bless. Hey everybody, so with another video, there is another loot drop. This time I am going to be putting something in for all of the card players out there. And this is the Pacific Rim card game. Now I am not sure if this is a 2-player deck or 1-player deck, but it says 100 cards in standard and advanced rules of play. It is open, but as far as I know, it is complete. If I can get this out with one hand. I think the cards have art from the movies on them, as far as I know. So, those are some attacks. This is a kaiju card. Definitely has some cool art on it. Is that a Jaeger? Striker Eureka 6 shooter. So I don't really do card games, but I remember I got this for a good price, so I brought it home. But it has sat here, and now you will have a chance to command your own Jaeger and push back the tide of kaiju with this Pacific Rim loot drop. Alright, take care everybody.